Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jeff Kearney. I'm the head of Gatorade Sports Marketing, and I'm really excited to join everyone here for today's live Gatorade Performance Partner Expert Chat. And we are thrilled to have you all as some of our first members of the Gatorade Performance Partner community, and to be able to provide you with the resources and opportunities like today's chat to help your team succeed. Throughout today's chat, we will be taking questions from those of you tuning in live. So please drop your questions into the comment section and we'll add them to the queue. So without further ado, let's get started with today's expert. So to set this up, this year has certainly presented obstacles for sports health and performance professionals like never before. And a key part of moving forward is learning how to adapt, from mental toughness and the importance of having a great team to understanding when to ask for help. With that in mind, I'm pleased to be joined today by Ben Saunders. He is a man with many titles. Talking to him the other day, many titles. Polar explorer, record-breaking long-distance skier, motivational speaker, instructor, professional athlete, and a few others. Ben will be sharing some of his advice on how to manage change, adversity, and self-motivating, how what Ben does can correlate to what we do and all of you do. We've all felt overwhelmed, or that as soon as one challenge is overcome, there are miles and miles of new obstacles waiting for us, especially this year. So speaking of covering miles and miles, nobody does it better than this man. Let's welcome Ben Saunders. Ben, how are you?
Jeff. I'm very well, thank you. Very well.
So just to talk about overcoming adversity, Gatorade's global headquarters are in Chicago. Tell us where you're joining us from today and how everyone's doing. Is everyone safe and healthy in your world?
Yeah, we're well. I am in the UK, so it's quite late here. It's just gone 11 p.m. But I kind of figured this is actually way easier than like red-eye flight to the US, which I did many times last year. So yeah, I'm in the southwest of the UK, quite rural place. The county's called Gloucestershire. So I escaped London last year, which was a really good move in hindsight. So I was in London for about 20 years, and now my wife and I are in the middle of nowhere, little house on a hill next to the woods.
Well, I'm sure the climate is very similar to Chicago. We're very mild right now, which is a good thing, but it's a little crisp outside, something you're familiar with. And for everyone joining us, you are going to help us highlight the right ways to keep sight of your goals, manage change, approach adversity. So to begin, let's start with an introduction and ground things a bit. Well, many of today's participants may be familiar with you and what you've done, read about you, or seen your TED Talks. Can you please tell us a little bit more about yourself? And pretty wide aperture here, your professions and what drew you to doing what you do?
Yeah, gosh, good question. I've had like 20 years to think of a good job title now, and I still haven't come up with a succinct version. I normally tell people that I lead polar expeditions, and then to which they respond, well, who do you lead? And well, actually, some of them are on my own. So that's what I do. I've spent 20 years. I've done 12 major expeditions, either in the high Arctic, so North Pole or Greenland, or in Antarctica. So I've covered cumulatively about 4,500 miles on foot, on skis, normally wearing a harness, dragging a sled in the coldest places on the planet. So I guess I'm a kind of snow and ice and sort of ultra endurance specialist.
And where did that start? Again, you talked about you got out of London at just the right time. Did you grow up in the countryside? What was your passion for the cold? How did you turn on to polar expedition?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not quite sure where the screw came loose, really. Most of my childhood was in the southwest UK, so again, quite rural. I have a younger brother. We were lucky. I realise now, having spent 20 years in London, we were so lucky having as much access to the outdoors as we did. We were outside the whole time, and I was one of those kids that didn't respond well to being told to sit down in a classroom, keep quiet, remember what you're being told. For me, I learned best when I was kind of outside, kind of engaging with stuff, doing stuff. So I've always loved the outdoors. I wasn't, this might be a surprise to some people, I definitely was not a kind of all-star athlete at school. I was a kind of late bloomer on that front. And it wasn't until, probably my teens, like kind of 14, 15, I got into running, and then mountain biking kind of was just starting to appear in the 90s as a sport, and we're in the UK, so we're kind of a few years after it emerged in the States. But for something about that kind of grabbed my imagination, and as a kid growing up in rural England, like having a bike, even from a young age, like having a bicycle meant freedom. So I guess in a strange way, I was always super active. I was always outdoors, but I definitely didn't see myself as an athlete until my teens, really. So kind of late starter in some senses.
All right. And then the inspiration for getting out in the cold and exploring the world, walking, hiking, climbing, was there an inspiration? Was there a moment, like you said, if you were a late bloomer as an athlete, like what did you see? What did you read? Where, as you described it, the screw suddenly came loose?
Yeah, very good question. So I blame it mostly on a guy called John Ridgway, who's also British. I actually saw him last month up in Scotland. He is now 82 years old. So he was one of my heroes as a kid, as a teenager. He was the first person, along with a guy called Che Blythe. So two guys. They were the first people to cross the Atlantic in a rowing boat in 1966. So they rowed in this open wooden boat, with two benches, just completely insane. But long before GPS or satellite phones or any of that stuff, they rode from Boston to Ireland, 93 days in an open wooden boat. Survived 2 hurricanes. He went on to sail around the world 3 times, held world records for that for a while. Long before that, he was in the Special Forces in the SAS in the UK for 10 years. He used to box for Great Britain. So to me, at age 15, 16, 17, he was this larger than life superhero. And he, before I was born, back in the early 70s, he started what he called an adventure school right up in the northwest coast of the Scottish Highlands, so like middle of nowhere. And it was a kind of outward bound center, like on steroids, and just this extraordinary place in the middle of nowhere, and mostly running corporate team building, leadership development courses. So I applied for a job without really much in the way of formal qualification, but I was just winging it. Wrote to him, applied for a job just after I left school, and to my amazement, was accepted to work there as an instructor for a year. So that is where the screw came loose. Like, he was such a great mentor, such an inspiring character to be around. A very physical guy. We'd go running every morning. We go swimming in the sea. It was just, we're outdoors in the mountains, like sailing, kayaking, like every day, active outdoors. So that was a magical year, and that should have been like my gap year, kind of between school and university. And I'm still on it now. Like I didn't make it a higher education. That didn't happen. I'm 43 now. Still trying to work out what I'm going to do when I grow up.
Well, I tell you, when you initially said that's when the screw came out, as you just described that year, I think I'm certainly envious. I'm sure a lot of other people are. That does sound like a magical year, just getting out and not having walls constraining you to do whatever you want. So very, very cool. So want to make sure you're aware of who you're speaking with today. Most of our audience tuning in today work in athletic performance, something, of course, you're very familiar with. As certified athletic trainers, certified strength conditioning coaches, physical therapists, registered dietitians, or a sports performance leader in some form or fashion, where it is necessary to have a high level of determination and grit. And they work crazy hours, arriving before the team to prepare for the day, and can be the last to leave. So therefore, they may sometimes feel like they're alone on the North Pole, so to speak. So that said, whether they're students or seasoned professionals, they've chosen a trade where they are serving and helping others. They are the motivators, so to speak, often serving as locker room psychiatrists. I'm sure you've been there talking to your sports performance specialists. So for someone who is supposed to help lead the motivation of athletes, telling them they can bounce back from an injury or lift that weight or they can achieve their goals, what advice do you have for them when they themselves may need the self-motivation, when they are tirelessly working and no one is watching? What words do you have for them to just help keep them going and know that they can get the job done?
Gosh. Okay. Well, to start with, actually coming back to job titles, I mean, you mentioned in the introduction athlete, and I do emphatically see myself as a really weird sort of professional athlete. I'm usually introduced as an explorer, which is a pretty weird job title for the 21st century. I've never drawn a map or named a glacier or a mountain range. I'm traveling even though I'm often, especially on these solo expeditions, incredibly isolated physically. I'm not in uncharted territory in the way that people would have been 100 years ago. There's satellite imagery now, so I'm definitely not. I can't claim to be an explorer in the kind of old-fashioned, like, Edwardian geographical sense of the word. But I do genuinely think that there is an element of exploration to what I've done over the years, and that is very much in a human sense. And really, kind of, for me, the motivation has come from trying to raise the bar, trying to push the boundaries, push the envelope in a particularly demanding field, and probably one of the narrowest niches imaginable. And it's a pretty weird thing to be drawn towards. But yeah, to me, these journeys seemed like pretty much the ultimate tests of endurance. In Antarctica 2013, 2014, my teammate and I, there were two of us on that trip, we covered 1,800 miles, 1,801 statute miles under our own human motive power. So 69 marathons back to back in the coldest place on Earth. And we were dragging, wearing harnesses, dragging sledges that were 440 pounds each at the start. So nearly 70 marathons back to back, dragging the equivalent of two fairly big guys in a bathtub, each. So in a place that averages, negative 35, 40 degrees. So these are kind of off the scale challenges when it comes to endurance. Not just physiologically, but kind of mentally, emotionally as well. They're incredibly tough challenges, and for me, that's the appeal. So it's from a pure athletic standpoint, what are we capable of achieving? And that year, 2013, 2014, we genuinely raised the bar. I still hold the record for the longest ever polar journey on foot. And that journey, and also the solo journeys I've done, the sort of paradox is that the more isolated I am, or this tiny team of two, as we were, the more isolated we are, the more absolutely reliant we are on the team in the background. And there's a huge team. We had 12 people working full time on that project, 2013-14. So almost like kind of mission control, everything from the logistics to medical support to weather forecasting, all that kind of stuff. And then the training, it was for me in some ways like several years kind of building up to that trip, but there was 18 months of really specific training building up to that project. And we had physiotherapists, sports massage therapists, nutritionists, endurance coaches, strength conditioning coaches, this huge team in the background of like unsung heroes, and we were totally reliant on them. And it's no exaggeration to say that I had to trust them not only with my own, sort of odds of success and kind of performance, but in many ways with my life. Like, I had to really, really implicitly trust this team in the background. So I am more aware than most that the coaches, the performance specialists in the background are the kind of so often the unsung heroes. So I want to kind of send a huge high five to all you guys for the work you do in the background. But gosh, when it comes to kind of staying motivated, I think for me, looking back on 20 years of doing these big expeditions, the biggest challenges I've had to overcome have always been in my own head. It's always been my own fear, my own self-doubt, my own lack of confidence. And I think the biggest ingredient in the success that I've had in my field has come through, the biggest ingredient has been self-belief. And I don't mean self-importance or ego or kind of conceit or arrogance, but rather the belief that tomorrow can be better than today, and that I have the capacity, I've got the agency to make that happen somehow. And my theory is that self-belief is a bit like a muscle. Like, the more you stretch it and test it, the stronger it becomes. And the stimulus it responds to, much like a muscle, it needs to be challenged. And I think that stimulus isn't success or failure, because I've had in my career way more failures than successes. I think the stimulus is endeavor, it's courage, it's bravery, it's the ability to take action without certainty, to try things you're not sure you're capable of achieving. I think the more you do that, the more time you spend outside your comfort zone, like the stronger your self-belief gets. And especially when it comes to kind of making it through challenging, unpredictable times, ultimately, I think your ability to persevere is a measure of how much you believe in yourself. So ultimately, I think it so often boils down to this peculiar quality, self-belief.
Yeah. But that's awesome. I think we all, again, as I referenced, this year has just been unlike any other, and I'll get back to kind of dealing with the unexpected. But on the mental prep, let's unpack that just a little bit more. The mental conditioning coach has been one of the newest positions we've seen added to sports performance teams. And, we've all learned it's not just physical strength. As you just said, it's the biggest challenge when you woke up every day. It wasn't how far you had to go that day or the cold. Those were certainly elements. I'm speaking like I've experienced that. I have a 12-minute walk to the train in Chicago. And I know it's 12 minutes because on the cold days, I'm counting the steps and the time. So I can't imagine doing what you do. But, when did that muscle develop with you? Is there anything you've done to strengthen this throughout your career? Because, it wasn't something necessarily where maybe you were like, boy, I'm mentally tough, I can do anything. For everybody that's on this, there are days where you just don't feel like showing up. How do you make sure that you're exercising that muscle every day?
Yeah, gosh, really good question. I think, and you're actually right. I early on, when I was 23, my first expedition, I definitely was not feeling courageous. I was absolutely petrified. Kind of thinking, what the hell have I got myself into? Like, this was a really, really stupid idea. I think in some ways it kind of it's down to experience. You kind of have to go through it. You can't learn to swim by reading a book about swimming. Like, at some point you've got to get into the water. And I think so often people think, oh well, I'm not gonna attempt the thing, whatever it is, until I've learned a bit more, or until I'm a bit more confident. But confidence only ever follows courage. So I think, again, like that kind of, and this is something I think that most athletes are very familiar with, that you have to struggle. It's kind of, the whole point is it's difficult, it's hard, it's challenging, it's uncomfortable, it's scary. And that's how you of course, I'm preaching to the converted here, but that's how you become stronger, by going through that difficulty and that process. God, I've lost my thread. Remind me of the question. There was something else I was
just work at day to day. Like, is there things that you do to, you didn't wake up well? There are some people that are just naturally confident, but things that you did to just continue that mental preparation to help, like you said, with the courage and the confidence. Or as legendary NCAA basketball coach in the U.S., Bobby Knight, once said, everybody wants to win championships, but nobody wants to practice. Building that muscle and building that practice, just some of the things that you have done to do that, to be mentally strong.
Absolutely. Gosh, yeah. So again, so much of it came down to the team, the support team. And I was lucky enough to have I had a fantastic, not only kind of coaches in the physical sense, but a coach in the sort of broader scheme of things, because I was also trying to raise all the money. I was trying to organize. It was like training for the Olympics and like project managing and funding the building of the stadium at the same time. So I had all this stuff going on. Like, I was the CEO of this weird business, but I was also the product. I was the thing that we were shipping, for our sponsors and partners. So it was a really stressful time, kind of building up each of these expeditions. It's extraordinarily stressful, kind of building up them. So I had some brilliant support, and I remember years ago thinking, okay, after that first expedition, 2001, which was a failure. We didn't get to the North Pole, like 2/3 of the way. I came back, really, really depressed. I'd failed at the most ambitious thing I'd ever attempted, and it took me a while to realize that experience had been invaluable in getting to where I have. But I contacted a few of like the best sports psychologists in the UK, and told them what I was doing and what I was planning, and they were all pretty thrilled. They were like, look, we kind of work with athletes who do things over seconds or minutes, or maybe a few hours if they're like an Ironman, but not 4 months. Like, we're not really quite sure how to advise you. And I ended up finding a couple of people that helped enormously, and this is particularly kind of building up to this huge 1,800-mile trip that started in 2013. And one of my concerns on that trip was that there were two of us on the ice. Me, my teammate is called Taka. He's was an old friend of mine, still is a very good friend of mine, and that's one of my proudest achievements, that we didn't fall out on that trip, because it was such a high pressure, operating environment. And we were, locked down in the UK with my wife in a house has been a piece of cake compared to that. The two of us in a tent, sleeping like that far away from each other, for 3.5 months, like living in a space it would be illegal to keep prisoners in. So we were good friends at the start. We had a lot of trust and faith in each other's abilities and experience and resumes and all those things. So we were a super strong team, but we'd also seen small teams just fall apart under that kind of pressure. So we wanted to try to do everything we could to perform to the best of our abilities as a team, and as a team where we were totally reliant on each other. And the strategy was, and this was, I'm kind of condensing about 6 months worth of work with a really good psychologist, but the strategy was, and actually I can draw an analogy where it came to our gear, our clothing, our kit. If something had like a really minor flaw, if the tent had a little tear in the fabric, or a seam in a jacket was coming unstitched, or something was, a zipper was broken, if you ignored it, or thought, it'll be all right, or I'll fix it next week, or when I can be bothered, or it'll last until the end of the trip, it'll be fine. Invariably, under that sort of pressure, both the intensity, the severity of the environment we're operating in, and also the self-imposed pressure of this particularly ambitious goal, if we ignored it, things would unravel and fall apart really quickly. And the same applied to our relationship, our dynamic as a team. So the deal was, if something wasn't working, if there was some sort of friction point or something the other person was doing or not doing that was impeding our performance somehow, the deal was we would stop, table it, talk about it, try and fix it straight away. And so often I think people assume that what I do is about toughness and hardness and gritting your teeth and kind of pushing through pain and discomfort and adversity. And yes, these aren't easy camping trips, but actually one of the biggest lessons for me is that bravery doesn't just mean being able to kind of keep going when things are tough. Bravery also means knowing when to ask for help. And that was vital. Being able to be genuinely honest with each other and open and frank, and not only in terms of kind of giving difficult feedback, but also in asking for help if we were struggling. And that was crucial.
Amazing. You had me at sleeping this far away from another person in the tent for 3 months.
Sharing a pee bottle for 108 nights.
Well, we're getting some great questions from the group that are attending here with us. But I have one more before we transition over, and it's tied to details and how important they are. Because rumor has it that, you referenced pulling 400 pounds, 200 plus kilos, 2 large men in a bathtub, as you referenced it, that you'll even go through and remove the labels off of a shirt. You'll check the style of zipper, things that, because every ounce counts. So details, obviously certainly important, but also related to details. I think any of our performance team members tuned in today will agree that preparation and attention to details is key, but we know that unforeseen events will happen. A player gets injured, somebody doesn't show up, the coach throws something at you. How, are there anything that this group can practice in advance to better handle the unexpected?
Gosh, well, yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm a huge geek, and again, there are some really interesting kind of sporting analogies here when it comes to the preparation, and particularly for us, the nutrition that we were dragging, 108 days worth of food, 6,000 calories a day, the clothing, it's all so sort of hyper specialized, and I became obsessed by saving weight and improving performance. So I think people sometimes assume that this is completely old school, and we're kind of like dragging these like wooden sleighs around. And the sledges themselves, custom made by a guy in Norway who used to work in Formula One, carbon and Kevlar. The runners are something called Delrin, like this ultra low friction polymer. The runners of our sledges were matched to our individuals, the width of our ski track. So so many. Yeah, you're absolutely right. We'd cut the labels out of clothes. We'd cut the metal tabs off of zippers and replace them with this cord. We replaced all of the guy lines, the cords on our tent with like a marginally thinner cord to save a few grams. All of our food was freeze dried. We were totally obsessed. I cut the handle off my toothbrush. We got pretty obsessed on that front. But also we were trying to accomplish we were trying to raise the bar. We were trying to do something that had never been done before in that field, and by quite a margin. And we were operating in an environment where all of the crucial factors were totally outside our control. So when it comes back to like how kind of what can you do to manage? How can you stay motivated, stay focused, stay on track when things feel out of control? Which clearly this year for almost everyone they have. It's just been unprecedented, extraordinary year for anyone in any walk of life. The big lesson for me from all of these expeditions is that ultimately they are, and this sounds really unsexy, but they're really an exercise in efficiency. It's an equation. It's time. I'm no good at math, but time, calories, distance, basically, and that's it. And you're trying to be as efficient as possible. And I had to learn very quickly that if I was kind of expending energy physically, mentally, emotionally on things that I couldn't change, that was a waste of time. Like that was holding me back. And that takes a lot of self-control, a lot of awareness, because for me on these expeditions, it could be the weather, the wind, the temperatures, the visibility, the snow and ice conditions, the friction of the surface, and these things can be frightening. The weather, a storm in Antarctica is terrifying if you're lying in a tent and that's your only shelter. It can be infuriating, zero visibility, kind of blizzard, whiteout conditions. It can be, frustrating, depressing, all these things. But we had to realize that if I'm spending energy on things I can't change, that is a waste of energy. So yeah. I guess to boil it down, like control the controllables is the kind of lesson here, and try to be very aware, especially when things get tough, especially when things feel out of control. Try to be aware of how and where you are focusing your energy, your time, your bandwidth. And if you're spending them on things you can't change, if you're getting stressed out, reading the news headlines or politics, or they're not things that you have a lot of influence over. So what can you do? And for us, it was putting one foot in front of the other. And actually, for most people, as an analogy, that holds true.
You make it sound so simple. Control the controllables. That bridges nicely to an audience question. So a reminder to everyone tuning in that our entire live discussion, you can submit any questions and engage with other attendees through the comment section. So keep the comments coming. Ben, this is a question from Cole. And again, kind of related to what you just talked about. How have you navigated the burnout phenomenon that we see in so much of the population?
Gosh. Yeah, good question. I a few years ago, I remember reading somewhere, I forget the book. I think it's one of Bill Bryson's books. He said the book kind of opened. It wasn't even the first chapter. It was like the little prologue bit. There was just a fact that like is seared into my brain. He said the average human lifetime is 650,000 hours. And I was like, whoa, that's not much. Okay, I must be like 30 something. Right? I was like, okay, got my calculator at my phone. Like, how many hours do I have left? Whoa, okay, how much time do I spend sleeping on average? Whoa, like, wow, like I've got so little time left and so much more. And I kind of became just obsessed by being productive and getting as much done as I could, and kind of cutting out stuff that actually in hindsight it was a mistake to cut out. And for so many years, I had this kind of tunnel vision focus on the goals I was trying to achieve in these big expeditions, and certainly came pretty close to burning out. And indeed, when we came back from that expedition, February 2014, we finished that big trip, 1,800 miles, 3.5 months. I was absolutely shattered in every sense of the word, and it was a really weird time because I just achieved the biggest thing I'd ever tried to achieve, and I think up until that moment, I'd always seen success as like achieving your goal. That's it, right? And kind of when you get there, life's going to be awesome. And when we achieved this goal, life was not awesome. Like I was totally like physically, I lost 22 kilos, so 50 pounds in 3.5 months. And we'd kind of beefed up, we literally put on fat and muscle beforehand, and we knew this was going to happen. But I came back, any sane coach would have told us what we were doing was insane. I mean, we were doing between 8 and 12 hours of exercise per day, 7 days a week for 3.5 months. We had 3 rest days, and we only had 3 rest days because on those 3 days, the weather was too bad to move. So they weren't, we weren't recuperating. We were lying in our tent, like terrified that the tent was going to get blown away. And, so we were kind of like classically like overtraining in every sense, and just came back, physically in such a bad state. Like it took about 9 months to recover fully, and then kind of mentally, emotionally, probably the same amount of time, because having achieved this goal, the thing that had been motivating me, had suddenly evaporated, and there was nothing there to replace it. So I think for me now, when it comes to kind of managing energy and avoiding burnout, I think it's and this again, it's difficult to talk about this without kind of descending into cliche, but I think it's kind of about finding balance. And for me, one of the kind of unusual things, and actually one of the really great things about these big expeditions, is that we are completely offline. We have a satellite phone, but the bandwidth is terrible. So we can update the website like every evening, send a little photo back and a text. We can make a few phone calls, but we didn't see the news for 4 months. We didn't get any email, wasn't on social media. And that's, I think it's one of the reasons I keep doing these big trips. It's like, in some ways, yes, they're exhausting, but they're also just such a different existence. And our lives were so simple, and actually staying focused down there was relatively easy because we knew exactly what we had to do. I didn't wake up in the morning going, okay, what am I going to do today? Let's look at my list, and God, what's in my diary? Because there was no diary, there was no inbox, there was nothing. No one could reach me, no one could call me. So we were kind of, in a way, made it easier to stay focused. And my, back here in the real world, my life is like most people's lives, kind of you overwhelmed with stimulus and input and demands from other people, and kind of multiple inboxes and social media and all this kind of stuff. So I think for me, it's kind of finding balance. And I have a dog. That's been one of the best things. She's 11 now, so like having a dog, like it just kind of it enforces, like a couple of times a day you have to go outside, take the dog for a walk. And I sometimes I'm like, I can put my headphones in, take my phone, like make some calls, and then after a while it's like, no, I'm just gonna walk the dog. I'm just gonna leave my phone at home and not listen to an audiobook, not do anything, just walk the dog. So kind of just finding a bit of time, a bit of space, every day, where you're not kind of reacting to stuff, I think is key. And yeah.
Now, I was going to say, it's good counsel. I have a feeling you're going to have hundreds of people listening to this going to get dogs, shutting off the news, and you've got me getting the calculator ready here to do the 650,000 hours countdown to find out how much time I have left.
It's really depressing. Yes, somebody, I forget who said this philosophy years ago. He said, "Time you enjoy wasting is not wasted time," and that struck a chord with me after my kind of few years of just being obsessed by being this like productivity machine. Like what do you mean? No, I'm not going to go to the party. I've got stuff to do. I can't go to the movies because I'm training. And after a while, I was like, oh, I'm kind of missing out on the good stuff here. So
yeah. Well, and more questions coming your way here based on what you just said too, kind of tied to the burnout. You're pulling 200 kilos or more than 400 pounds. This comes from Kathleen. You're combating the cold, a lack of rest. How do you stay fueled? What are your go-to cold weather foods and beverages? And Kathleen, just so you know, there's not an Albertsons in Antarctica on the North Pole, so I'm sure that the Gatorade wasn't available down there. But yes, no, seriously, what were you lost 50 pounds. What were you putting in your body to make sure that you stayed properly fueled?
Yeah, gosh. Well, actually, we mentioned, Jeff, when we spoke last week, Asko, you can drop. So I know there's a sort of a Gatorade link there over the years. So I spent a long time talking to the best nutritionists, best sports scientists I could find, because to me this again, I kind of talked about this exercise and efficiency and seeing this as an endurance challenge. The kind of traditional, like old school approach was to take very high fat diet. The thinking being that it's just a more dense source of calories. Fat has 9 calories per gram, carbs, protein have 4, give or take. So surely if your sledge is full of fatty food, that's more calories. And people like Oscar said, well, kind of, but actually, for what you're doing, carbohydrate is the body's like preferred energy source, and really you're kind of performing. We tried on a couple of training trips. We actually tried skiing with heart rate monitors, and it was just disastrous because the batteries kept dying. Because you're wearing it for like 11 hours at a time, and it's cold, and then the sledge harness kind of gets in the way. So we got a little bit of data, and it's fairly it's a fairly low heart rate. You're kind of most time ticking over. For me, it was like 130, 140. So it's kind of super aerobic, low intensity, and you can kind of chug along forever. But we were pretty high carb. So we took on that trip, 2013-14, I think it's about 700 grams of carbohydrate per day in the diet. And so breakfast is all the food's freeze dried. You do not want to be pulling any water, because you can get water from snow. So we have a stove, and we're dragging lots of fuel for the stove. So you can melt snow in the porch of the tent every morning, every evening. And we did a lot of that because we got through, on long days, about 5 liters of water each. I don't know what it was in pints or gallons, but hopefully most people are bilingual.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. 5 liters, which is a fair amount, and actually Antarctica is a desert. Technically, it's the driest continent on Earth. It has less precipitation than Africa, and because of the extremely low air temperatures, there's no moisture in the air, so you become very dehydrated just through breathing, outside during the day, and you don't really feel thirsty because it's super cold. So we had to be quite disciplined in how much we drank and kind of staying hydrated. So breakfast is in a bag, and it's basically a kind of a oatmeal granola type mixture, except it was made with like powdered double cream and a few really geeky stuff like medium chain triglycerides and kind of a few other bits and bobs. But that's like in a bag, hot water from a stove into the bag, leave it a few minutes, eat it with a spoon. We would wash that down with a kind of protein and carb, shake, except hot. Everything's made with hot water, so we had to kind of test stuff to make sure that it worked with like boiling water, and then a few supplements, because obviously we had 0 fresh vegetables or fruit or anything, and then we'd kind of pack everything up, and then we'd have another like half liter of basic carb drink before we set off. And then during the day, we didn't have lunch, but we'd stop every 90 minutes. So there was no big meal during the day, but every 90 minutes we'd stop and have a third of a liter. It was really specific. We had these like Nalgene bottles with a measurement thing. So a third of a liter of again, like hot carb drink and a snack. So we had some specially made bars that were, gosh, I'm trying to think if there's an American equivalent. Basically they're kind of mostly nuts and
you may have an international audience here. You may have some folks from your side of the pond.
Yeah, I'm just trying to. In the UK, we have there's a brand called Naked, NAKD, Naked bars. There's one in the US called Organic Food Bar. That's just what they call it, Organic Food Bar. But they're kind of, and they tend to use like fatty nuts, so like macadamia nuts, cashew nuts. That's the same. Like at room temperature, they're kind of a bit greasy and a bit oily, but actually at -40, they were perfect and still like they didn't go rock hard. You didn't break your teeth on them. So we had these like specially made energy bars. We had some nuts like cashew nuts, a bit of dark chocolate, a bit of like dried meat that we'd bought in Chile, kind of salami type stuff. And then in the evening we'd have another like a kind of recovery shake, so sort of protein, electrolytes, a bit of carbs. What else? A couple more little snacks, and then the evening meal was in a bag again. Kind of pour in the hot water, leave it a few minutes. So yeah, 6,000 calories a day, and we still lost. I lost, let's say, 50 pounds in 3.5 months. So it was a huge metabolic turnover.
Awesome. I'm gonna rapid fire you here with a couple more questions tied to your expeditions. One is from Jonathan. What is more difficult, the duration or conditions of your expeditions? And then the second one, also from our audience, from Matt. If you had to rank them, do you feel sleep or proper equipment is more important for elite athletes in any sport? So again, Jonathan's, what's more difficult, duration or conditions? From Matt, sleep or proper equipment?
Yeah. So the first one, I think it was, looking
and I'll cover the brand logos here so you can be brand agnostic with your response. So.
Well, yeah, interesting. So hang on, the first one was duration
or conditions.
Or conditions. I would say duration. Like that was especially at the start. Like in some ways, that trip, all of these trips are toughest at the start because everything is ahead of you. And as you know, I mentioned earlier on, I was running on the track this evening with a local running club, and we were just doing like 8 by 800 reps. But like when you finish the first one, there's like, oh man, I've got 7 to go. Oh, geez. And then by the time you've done 6, you're like, okay, I'm on the home straight. And it's kind of the same, but in a completely mind blowing sense when you're trying to do 1,800 miles, and everything is toughest at the start because the sledge is heaviest. It's full of food. It gets a little bit lighter every day. So things get kind of marginally easier. You get marginally faster every day. So like day 2, I think we did 3 miles in 8 hours. And it just, it felt impossible. So the goal, rather than being motivating, was actually the opposite, like demotivating, completely intimidating. And I talked about kind of focus and controlling the controllers, but for us, focus didn't just mean like the breadth or the narrowness of focus, and trying to block out things we couldn't control. It also meant how far ahead we focused. And when things were really tough, like day 2, 3 miles, really, really bad weather, super heavy sledges, just everything just feels impossible. I never admitted this to Taka, my teammate, but I secretly gave myself permission to quit. I was like, well, this is hopeless. Like there's a reason no one's tried this in 100 years. I'm an idiot. So you know what? It's impossible. We're going to quit. But we're not going to quit right now because that bit of ice on the horizon looks really good. Like if we can just get there, that looks a couple of hours away. If we can get there, we can put the tent up. You could land an aircraft there. That we'll stop. And then so everything for the next hour, 2 hours, whatever, would go into getting to that milestone. And then we'd get there and we'd have a little, sit on the sledges, have some hot drink, have some food, have a chat. And I think, well, we haven't collapsed. Like maybe that bit of ice on the horizon looks better. Like maybe we'll get there and then we'll decide. And that's how I got through it, like early on, just with these kind of little mind games, like almost removing the pressure of the ultimate goal because it was too massive to comprehend early on, and just was completely demotivating. So for me, kind of breaking it down, it was the scale, the distance, that was the biggest challenge early on. It's like getting on a treadmill and setting the distance for 1,800 miles. It's just
yeah. And then to help you get there, sleep or proper, well, and again, not just focused on expeditions. This is a broad question, just across sport. What do you feel is more important for the athlete, sleep or proper?
Yeah. Well, on that expedition, we definitely did not sleep enough, and that was, in a way, that was kind of forced upon us. We had this super tight time window. We had this kind of a little bit less than 4-month time window. We could extend it by a few days because that's basically the season. That's the daylights. Like either side of that is 24-hour darkness. you just can't operate, can't use aircraft down there, can't get home. So we had this super tight time window, and we had, I think we were able to extend it by a few days. We could pay to keep this airstrip open, like at the coast of Antarctica, but it was like $30,000 a day. So we had this incentive to finish on time. So super tight time window, and early on we were making slower progress than we'd anticipated. The weather was particularly bad for a couple of weeks. So, the kind of one thing that we could compress to cover more distance was to sleep there. So I think on that trip, 3.5 months, we probably averaged 6 hours a night, maybe even a little less than that. So we definitely were not sleeping enough. Like it was really, really suboptimal conditions in almost every sense for like elite performance. But that, to me, that was part of the sort of perverse challenge of it. Clearly for us, gear was vital. We're in a place where, if you're outside in a pair of Speedos, you would be dead in a few minutes. So we were like astronauts. We were totally reliant on our gear. So that was vital. I think kind of back in the real world, I'm a total like gear nerd. I've got so many different running shoes, different brands, different types, all the latest. Like there's some new gadget comes up, pretty okay. New Garmin, oh fantastic, bike, carbon fiber, like oh yeah, great, yeah, ceramic bearings, that's going to make me go faster. So I think there's a kind of temptation to think that you can kind of buy your way to better performance, and clearly for athletes at the absolute top end, like everything counts in the same way that we cut the labels out of our clothes to save a few grams each, and that was as much as much of a kind of mental thing rather than perhaps it would have been so fractional in terms of improving our speed, but knowing that we'd gone to those lengths was such a big deal when it came to staying motivated. But I think one of the things I love about sports, about fitness, about training is you can't buy it. Like you have to work. Doesn't matter how rich you are. Like you've got to put in the hours and put in the hard yards, and you can't cheat that. So I think I would say that the basics. So sleep, quality of training, recovery, just lifestyle, diet, are way more important than gear. And I love reading about, Britain. I'm training for a marathon next year, which kind of feels like a really like tiny challenge compared to the like 70 marathons back to back dragging a sledge. But my marathon PB was 2:55. I set that 14 years ago. So I'm as a goal to stay motivated while it's impossible to travel to the polar regions right now. I was like, okay, I'm gonna beat my marathon time. So I'm training hard for that right now. But I love reading about, like, Britain had back in like the 1960s, 70s, 80s, like some world-class marathon runners. We had guys running like 2:10, and they were like, there's a guy, Ron Hill, was like one of the legends in the UK. This is probably a terrible thing to say on a I can see the Gatorade logo on my screen, but he didn't eat or drink anything during a marathon. And he was talking, I heard him speak years ago. We spoke alongside each other at the same event, and he was talking about, I forget if it was the Olympics or I think what the event was. It was some super top end thing. And there was I think a Japanese runner who was ahead of him. And he said at one point he ran through one of the drink stations and he saw a paper cup on the ground. So the Japanese guy had a drink. Yeah. And he was like, I knew he'd cracked. I knew I'd got him. So I kind of love reading about these like old school athletes who are performing actually at an extraordinary level in gear that, the shoes he was wearing then in the 60s, 70s. Like I wouldn't run 2 miles in those. Like what ludicrous. So I think gear, for most athletes is kind of overrated, and the basics like sleep, nutrition, lifestyle, training hard, bright coaching, that like they're the kind of foundation. Like the gear is the sort of marginal gain at the very top.
Well, if this were an 1,800-mile journey, we're at about mile 1,750. So winding it down here, we do have a couple more questions. This is probably going to be the last one. I'll try to squeeze it in here. Johnny asked a question about goals. You've talked a lot, Ben, about motivation. If you had to pick 3 things, short and sweet, that are most important that you need to keep in mind as you set new goals, what would they be?
Oh, wow. Okay, 3 things. Firstly, they've got to be super specific. So for me, marathon, as an example, my PB is 2 hours 55:18. So my goal next year is to run faster than that. If I'm 2:55:19, I've failed. 2:55:17, I've succeeded. So I think goals need to be really specific. If my goal was just to become a better runner, I kind of say, well, I've done that already. I'm doing pretty well right now. I'm training with this club. So I think goals need to be really specific, but that also makes them kind of scarier in a way. It means the likelihood of failing is far higher, but they've got to be specific. Secondly, I think they've a little bit intimidating. It's a bit scary. Like if you're confident, if you know how you can do it, you're probably not aiming high enough. Like, I think they've got to be genuine. Gosh, third thing. When picking a goal, I would say possibly the most important thing. And I talked about this kind of feeling, actually expecting to feel elation when I achieved this massive goal in Antarctica in 2014, and actually kind of feeling a bit low afterwards. I think for me, I see goals now as kind of waypoints and not as destinations. So try to bear that in mind. Try to remember that, for me, I define success now as continuing to strive well. I no longer see success as achieving a goal. I still have a ton of goals. I'm still wildly ambitious. There's still a load of stuff I want to do. But I've come to realize that the satisfaction comes from the struggle, comes from the striving, comes from continuing to evolve. So don't see your goals as destinations.
Well, and again, I'm going to squeeze one more question in. I know we got about 5 minutes here. You do a lot of stuff in isolation or in a very small group. You said you have mission control and a team. But have you leaned on anyone when self-doubt creeps in? Have you leaned on anyone, an individual, a group, a community, any specifics that this audience can tap into? Like, how do you make sure that there's somebody there that has their hand on your back to help you along the way?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mentioned having a coach in the kind of broader sense of the word. A guy called Jerry Colonna, Colonna. I feel super lucky to have started. I started working with him, probably 15 years ago, a long time ago, and he is one of the wisest people I've ever met. So I think having someone like that, someone, I guess it doesn't have to be someone older, but I think, for me, having someone who's got a bit of wisdom, got a bit of hard-won experience, like having someone that you respect, and that you are willing to be honest and open and frank with, and willing to talk about what you're finding difficult right now. I think that's super important. So yeah, Jerry was a key character in the best part of my adult life, really. So I think that's key. And then I think also kind of finding your community, and clearly I'm talking to a community now, but finding, I do such a weird thing for a living that in many ways is, obviously it's kind of literally solitary when I'm on solo expeditions, but even kind of the rest of the time, like, trying to raise funding, sponsorship for polar expeditions. It's a pretty weird thing to do for a living. So trying to find, kind of peers, people that are in the same, facing the same sorts of challenges, I think is really key. Finding your tribe. So yeah, vital.
Well, unfortunately, we're at the hour here, but a couple things I want to make sure we hit here at the end. First, thank you, Ben, so much for joining us here today and sharing your incredible insights. The discussion has been fantastic. We've learned so much about how to manage change, adversity, how to self-motivate, how to just take things one step at a time, control the controllables, as you said, how to survive a bit longer in the cold, which I can definitely take away. And most importantly, I think, is just the power of the mind, being mentally tough and having the ability to act with certainty. So thank you for that. Any final takeaways that you want to leave with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, I will say, I'm sure there were loads more questions, and I'm sorry for my long rambling answers. I feel like we were just getting started.
No,
so I am. You can find me on social media. I'm Polar Ben on Twitter and Instagram, probably two I use most. So if you have a question that I haven't answered, feel free to ping me. It's just come up at midnight here, so I'm going to bed now. So I'll answer them tomorrow or later this week. So do find me on social media. And I think, gosh, as a kind of final parting thought, I had for years. We had this small office in London, like borrowed office, small team, trying to get this huge project off the ground. And I had my desk was in the corner of the room. Framed above my desk was a page from one of my school reports. I was, I think, 13 years old. There was a line out. It said, "Ben lacks sufficient impetus to achieve anything worthwhile." Now, in some ways, I've probably taken that out of context. I think it was my French teacher talking about my
it doesn't sound like that impacted you at all.
Yeah. There's a bit of, if I'm told something's impossible, I'm like, okay, like watch this. But I think, for me, the biggest lesson from my career is that no one else is the authority on your potential. With enough self-belief, enough resilience, the right people around you, the right team, the right tools, pretty much anything is possible. And I think, the word impossible is normally just someone else's opinion. Like, very rarely is it the fact. So that's a parting thought.
I love it. That's amazing. So thank you again. And before we wrap things up, thank you as well for everyone who took the time out of their busy schedules to join us for today's live chat. We also encourage everyone to follow Gatorade Performance Partner on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn so you can hear the latest about new tools and resources and don't miss out on any future chats like this one. So we hope you all enjoyed it. Gatorade Performance Partner, and look forward to seeing you all back here in the future. So we hope everyone has a great holiday season. Thank you all again, and stay warm, Ben, especially you.
Real pleasure. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks.